My child, what if the very thing you have been most afraid to feel is the key to everything you've been asking me to unlock? Not the circumstances outside you, not the door you've been watching, willing it to open, not the relationship you hope will repair itself, or the provision you've been praying will arrive. What is keeping you from the fullness of what I have prepared is inside you, in a room you have not yet permitted yourself to enter. I am standing at the threshold of that room right now, not to drag you in before you're ready, but to tell you something important about what's inside. It is not as terrifying as you've imagined. What lives in that room is not a monster. It is a wound, and the wound was real. But the wound is not the wall. How the walls were built, you built those walls carefully, deliberately, one brick at a time, and each brick had a name. There was the brick of the words someone spoke over you, words that lodged in your memory like a splinter you could never quite reach. There was the brick of the moment you understood that the person who was supposed to protect you would not, or could not, or simply chose not to. There was the brick of the time you opened yourself to someone and were met with judgment instead of warmth, and you decided quietly, without announcing it, that you would never make that mistake again. There was the brick of the grief you swallowed because the moment was wrong, or the people weren't safe, or the loss seemed too large for what the situation should have warranted. The brick of the expectation that shattered. The brick of the dream that died in a season when you were too exhausted to defend it. The brick of the version of yourself you stopped believing in because enough authoritative voices seemed to confirm that version wasn't worth the investment. You built those walls because you were trying to survive, and I want you to hear this clearly. I understand the building. I do not condemn you for it. When all you have access to is bricks, you build with bricks. That is wisdom of a kind. Not the fullness of the life I designed for you, but a reasonable response to unreasonable conditions. But the walls that protected you then are doing something else now. They are not just keeping harm out, they are keeping something in. Not only the pain, though the pain is there, waiting in that sealed room for someone trustworthy enough to sit with it. They are also keeping in your capacity for full joy, your ability to receive love without bracing for the moment it withdraws, your freedom to dream without a protective ceiling of lowered expectation, your access to the version of yourself that existed before the wounds altered the original blueprint. The wound was real, but the wound is not the wall. I want to become your builder, not the kind who arrives with demolition equipment and forces everything down at once. That is not healing. That is re-injury with different tools. I am the kind of builder who walks the structure with you slowly, who puts a hand against each wall and listens, who understands what each room was built to hold and what it is holding now, who looks at the full picture of what is there, the damage, the layers of accumulated history, the rooms sealed shut, and says, this is workable. This is exactly what I came for. This is where we begin. Every healing I do begins with an honest look at what is actually there, not a sanitized version, not the presentation you offer when managing how much of your interior others are allowed to see. The actual structure, with all its history visible in the material. The places that still ache when something brushes against them unexpectedly. The memories that surface without invitation, bringing emotion that seems disproportionate to the current moment, but is not disproportionate at all. It is the response of a wound that was never fully processed, reaching out from its contained room. I want to walk into all of that with you. not to expose you or hold up what we find as evidence of spiritual failure, to restore what was damaged, to liberate what was trapped, to show you that the room behind the locked door contains not just the pain, but also waiting patiently beneath it, like something that has learned to exist in low light, your capacity to love, your longing for beauty, your ability to hope, dormant but absolutely not extinguished. I want to be honest with you about this process, rather than offer a version that sounds reassuring but doesn't prepare you for the real work. First, healing requires that you stop running from what you feel. This is not an invitation to indulge every emotion without wisdom. It is an invitation to stop treating your own feelings as threats that must be controlled before they cause damage. Feelings were not designed to be contained indefinitely. They were designed to move through you, to carry their information to the surface, be received, be processed, and then be released. When they are consistently prevented from doing that work, they do not disappear. They build pressure. They find other routes. They leak out as irritability. The sharp edge in your voice when someone asks a perfectly reasonable question at the wrong moment. They appear as bone-deep exhaustion that sleep doesn't touch, because the exhaustion comes not from physical depletion, but from the energy spent maintaining the containment. They settle as numbness, a flatness where response used to be, a gray where color once lived. They surface as the inexplicable sadness that arrives without a clear trigger, borrowing whatever emotion is available as a vessel for what has been waiting, sometimes for years, to be felt and released. I am not asking you to feel everything all at once. That would be flooding a foundation that needs careful, deliberate drainage. I am asking that you begin, in the safety of my presence, one room at a time, to allow what has been held to finally move through you. Second, healing requires that you revisit certain stories, not to rewrite the facts. What happened to you was real and deserves to be honored as real, but to examine with fresh eyes the conclusions drawn from the facts. The conclusion that you are fundamentally hard to love was formed in moments when love was withheld, or given so conditionally that receiving it felt more like an audition than a relationship. That conclusion was drawn from a biased sample, from the particular people in your life at the particular moment when that belief was forming. Those people do not constitute an exhaustive data set. The conclusion that vulnerability always leads to harm was formed from moments that were genuinely painful. It does not account for the full range of what intimacy becomes when the person across from you is safe. The conclusion that you must earn your place in every relationship through consistent performance was built from an environment where love was distributed according to how well expectations were met, a framework of conditional love that was never the architecture I designed for your heart. These stories are understandable. They are logical within their limited data. They are not true. And the work of healing involves allowing them to be revisited in the light of something wider. The truth about who I am and what I have always said about you. Third, healing requires time. This is perhaps the part that demands the most patience and generates the most frustration, because there is genuine suffering in inhabiting the unfinished space between wounding and restoration. But a wound that heals properly from the inside takes longer than one that is only covered on the surface. And the one that heals from the inside doesn't reopen under pressure. The one that was only covered will hold for a while, then the next significant impact will find it, and it will be raw again. The work that takes time is the work that lasts. Trust the pace of the builder who has built things. that have endured. V, the rules I know by name. I am not speaking in generalities. I know the specific layout of who you are. I designed the original blueprint with care, and I have been present for every modification made under the pressure of circumstances. The room of your worth is, for most of you, the most heavily modified room in the entire structure. The messages you received about your value arrived early, from sources that carried enormous weight in your young interior life, before you had any framework capable of testing them against something more reliable. They became, without your conscious agreement, part of the structural material of who you believed yourself to be. Some of you were told you were a burden, that your needs were too much. Some were told that love was allocated according to performance, valued when you succeeded, merely tolerated otherwise. And you constructed your entire life around the management of achievement. Because it felt like the only reliable path to acceptance your heart was designed to receive freely. Some were told that specific parts of you, parts as essential as the color of your eyes, were unacceptable until changed or hidden, and you learned to live divided. The acceptable version on the outside, the unacceptable parts locked in the interior, unable to receive the love that was technically present, because the parts that most needed to be loved had been taught to hide. I want to renovate that room. I want to remove the interior walls built by voices that never had the authority they claimed over your sense of self. I want to restore the original dimensions wide enough and high enough to hold the full truth of who you are without requiring any part of you to be reduced before it can be admitted into the habitable space. The worth I assigned to you when I created you was not a conditional allocation. It was the worth of something made with specific intention, shaped with care, breathed into with life. That worth was not diminished by what happened to you. It does not fluctuate based on anyone else's recognition or withholding of recognition. It simply is. The way a diamond does not become a lesser diamond because it spent years buried in dark ground where no light could reach it. The room of self-condemnation is consistently one of the most densely furnished rooms in the interior life. Self-condemnation extracts from a genuine mistake a verdict about fundamental character rather than a description of a specific action. It says not I did something harmful, but I am something harmful. Not I failed in this instance, but I am constitutionally a failure. That voice is not mine. I want to be unmistakably clear about this. The voice that convicts, the one that says this action was not aligned with who you are designed to be. Here is the harm it caused. Here is the direction back toward alignment. That voice is mine. It always comes with direction. It always arrives with the assurance that I am with you in the correction, and that the correction is an act of love. The voice that condemns, the one that says you are irredeemable, that the accumulation of your failures is too great for grace to reach. That voice has never been from me. The cross was not offered to a cleaner version of you. It was offered for you, with your particular failures already fully known. The nails were not a surprise. Every future moment of wandering was already visible to the one choosing to go there anyway. The cross stands as permanent, irreversible evidence that your worth exceeds any calculation that could be performed from your performance record. Let the weight of self-condemnation begin to lift, not by pretending the failures didn't happen, but by placing them inside the only framework large enough to hold them without being overwhelmed. The framework of a love that decided in advance you were worth whatever the redemption would cost, and then paid it in full. The room of unprocessed grief holds losses the world did not recognize as losses. Grief over a childhood that wasn't what it was supposed to be. Not a single dramatic event, just an atmosphere missing something essential. Grief over the version of your life you carried in your imagination and the way reality has diverged. Grief over relationships that ended before you were ready. Grief over parts of yourself you quietly set down because the environments you inhabited could not hold them. The creative impulse that got practical concerns applied to it until it fell silent. The hope that got enough disappointments applied to it until it learned to want less. Unprocessed grief is one of the heaviest loads a person can carry, and it is particularly heavy because the weight is invisible. Grief does not operate on social timelines. What was not given sufficient space to move through you does not dissolve with the passage of time. It finds storage, and it waits with extraordinary patience for a space safe enough to finally do what it was always intended to do: move through you, deliver its information, and release. I am giving you permission right now to grieve what needs to be grieved. I can receive your grief. I have received the grief of every person who ever brought it to me, and not one of them broke me by doing so. Every tear that fell in my presence was caught, cataloged, kept, and ultimately redeemed. And let me tell you what is on the other side, because this is the truth that makes the entering worth the cost. The fear that keeps most people from allowing grief to move through them is the fear that the feeling will be unbearable and they will find nothing on the other side. But what I have found again and again in the people who brought their grief into my presence and allowed it to do its work is not emptiness, it is spaciousness. The room that grief occupied, tightly packed with what could not be released, becomes, when the processing is complete, a room with room in it. Room for joy that is genuine rather than performed. Room for connection that is real rather than managed. Room for hope that reaches upward without the glass ceiling of self-protection. Room for the version of yourself that the grief had been keeping company all along, waiting beneath the weight for the weight to finally lighten. V, the voice that is not mine. The enemy of your soul has studied you. He knows exactly where the wounds are located. He knows which rooms are locked and what is stored inside them. And his strategy is not random, it is precise. He comes at the moments when you are most tired, because tired people have less access to truth as a counterweight to lies. He comes through wounded people, channeling their unprocessed pain in your direction as an instrument of diminishment he could not accomplish directly. He comes as the internal monologue that sounds like your own voice but is not, the one that replays failures without the context of growth. That compares your interior to other people's exterior. That finds the gap between where you are and where you hope to be and presents it as evidence of rejection rather than as the ordinary territory of a life in process. But here is what he cannot do. He cannot change what I have declared over you. He cannot revoke the purpose embedded in you before you were born. He cannot take back what was purchased for you at the cross. He can confuse you about your identity, and he has been effective at that through the mechanisms of wounding and shame. But confusion about identity and actual loss of identity are entirely different things. You still are who I made you, even when the wounds have made it difficult to see it. The healing I am doing in you is, among other things, the clearing of that confusion so that what was always true becomes visible again. V7. On faith that has been through something, Some of you are carrying faith that has been significantly strained by the distance between what you believed and what has happened. By prayers answered in forms you weren't waiting for, by words spoken over your life whose fulfillment has been so delayed they feel more like memories of hope than active promises. The honest inner response to all of that is not the triumphant testimony others give. It is something more fragile and more complicated. A mixture of continued reaching toward me and genuine doubt about whether the reaching is doing anything. Love that has not found a reason to stop, and questions that have not found adequate answers. I want to receive that complicated faith. The mixture you are carrying, the doubt and the love coexisting, the reaching and the questioning happening simultaneously, is not disqualified faith. It is what faith actually looks like when it has been working in real conditions, when it has not been protected from difficulty, and therefore has not been preserved in the smooth condition of untested belief. That kind of faith is not weak, and I am not requiring you to perform certainty you don't feel before I respond to what you bring. The confidence I am building in you is not the kind that has never been challenged. It is the kind that has been through the challenge and found what was on the other side. Quiet, not needing to announce itself, sitting in the center of the person who carries it, doing its work without constant management, because it is grounded in something that has proven itself through conditions designed specifically to reveal whether it was real. 8. The new season, there are doors I am opening that you have not yet seen, not the ones you have been watching, the ones where you've invested years of sustained attention and accumulated prayer, new ones arriving from directions you weren't watching. These new doors will carry the unmistakable quality of things specifically prepared for who you are becoming. Not the version of you organized around the wound, but the version being healed and increasingly organized around the truth of who I made you to be. The provisions you need are in transit. The relational fractures are being worked on from the inside of both parties in ways neither party can see and neither can manufacture, but which will become visible in the gradual thaw of what was frozen, the softening of what was hard, the return of willingness where there was only resistance. And as healing progresses in you, something begins to shift in the relationships around you, not through your effort to change the dynamics, through the natural radiation of a changed interior. A person who is less organized around their wounds brings a different quality of presence into every interaction. The defensiveness that protected a tender place begins to soften as the tender place is actually being tended. The withdrawal that kept closeness at a safe distance begins to ease as closeness becomes less threatening to an interior that is increasingly stable. This is how your healing becomes a gift to the people around you. Quietly, steadily, unremarkably, through the transformation of daily presence. Peace that is real rather than performed creates an atmosphere in which others can also be real. And slowly, the relational landscape around a healing person begins to reflect the healing. Not all at once, but genuinely and unmistakably over time. IX. What I see when I look at you, I want to tell you what I see from my position, which has access to everything about you that the distorted mirror in that room has missed. I see someone who is still here after everything, after the seasons that should have broken the foundation and did not, because the foundation was being held by something stronger than what was attacking it. After the disappointments that accumulated to a weight that seemed unbearable and was born anyway, after the times the walls went up and the times something got through them anyway, and you kept going, you are still here, still reaching, still asking the question that brought you to this moment. That persistence is not a small thing. It is evidence of something I placed in you that does not give up on what it was made for, even when the circumstances have offered every reasonable argument for giving up. I see the beauty that the wounds could not touch, the particular texture of your compassion, the specific frequency of your creativity, the unique shape of your capacity for love. These were not canceled by what happened to you. They were sometimes buried. They are being excavated now. The building that is being rebuilt. Let me leave you with this picture. Imagine a building that has gone through a significant structural event, not a total collapse, but serious impact. Walls cracked, rooms damaged, some areas sealed off because they weren't safe to enter without proper support. From outside, if you walk past without looking closely, the building still looks like a building, but inside, you would find the rooms where daily life continues, alongside the rooms bearing a simple sign: out of order. Do not enter. Those closed rooms are not empty. They contain what was there before the impact, reorganized by it. Furniture displaced, light limited, dust accumulating, and somewhere underneath what the impact deposited, the original quality of the room still exists. The floors are still real floors. The walls are still real walls. What the room was designed to be has not been canceled. It has been covered. You are that building. The builder I am does not walk past and shake his head at the damage. I walk up to the door. I bring the right tools. Not a sledgehammer, but the precise instruments of someone who understands this specific structure. I enter. I begin the work of clearing what the impact deposited, reestablishing what was true before the event altered it, repairing what was cracked, opening what was sealed, returning the room to the fullness of what it was always meant to be. And when the work is done, the room that went through the event is not inferior to a room that never experienced damage. It is actually more interesting. It carries a history that untested rooms do not carry. And the work that went into restoring it is visible in the quality of what it became. This is what I am doing in you, room by room, with the precision, the care, and the patience the work requires, and with the love of a builder who chose this specific structure, not because it had no damage, but because it had the foundational quality that makes restoration possible, and the design that makes restoration worth everything it costs. The wound was real, but the wound is not the wall, and the wall in the hands of the builder who loves you becomes the testimony that someone who was broken was rebuilt by someone who is very good at rebuilding broken things. Open the door, find that you were never alone in there, and trust the one who has been waiting with you in the dark, patient as the first light of a long-awaited season, ready to begin the moment you let him in. Amen.